Well, I'm 73. I don't know how many governments I've witnessed, but I've always been interested in politics. But they must be by far and away the most incompetent government that we've had in my lifetime. They haven't got a clue. If they admitted that they didn't know and that they got it wrong and they stopped living in this fantasy world, then we'd have a chance of getting on top of this, but they don't. Remember, the week beginning the 9th of March, there were 10 or 12 deaths a day. 10 or 12 days later, it was in the hundreds. That's where we are. There was 70 or 80 deaths last Thursday, Friday, 140 yesterday. If it's doubling, even every week, we'd be up to nearly 300 by the end of next week. We'd be up to 600 by the week after. We'd be up to 1,200 in 3 weeks. Over the 1,000 mark, which is where we were at the end of March into April. And remember, we had over 1,000 deaths a day for about 2 weeks in going into April. So we could be back there as we get into November. At the very outset, you remember when I was on Question Time, Newsnight and all those programs, and I was regarded as some kind of mad professor and all the rest of it and causing fear in the country. And then it all went quiet a few weeks later when what I'd said came true. And, you know, it gives me absolutely no pleasure to say this feels like it felt in March. Absolutely no pleasure whatsoever. I don't want this. I don't want this for me. I don't want it for my family. I don't want it for the rest of the country. It's been brought on us by an incompetent government, incompetent and chaotic government. We're in a mess. This is chaos. It's looking really grim. You know, that first wave, which of course never went away, was quite short. We interrupted it too late, but we got it under control. We threw away the dividend of control over the summer by the incitement by the Prime Minister to go back to the office and go shopping and drinking and eating and everything. So the virus carried on circulating. And now it looks like we're going to have a bigger wave, which may last longer because it's only coming into the beginning now of winter. And, you know, this virus will like the cold, likes crowds, crowded places, closed environments, intimate contact between people. So this virus is very happy. It'll start killing large numbers of people shortly. We saw the number of deaths doubled from last Thursday, Friday till yesterday. If that's now going to be the picture with doubling every few days, we're back to March, April, and it's grim. But, you know, the government's lost control and it's chaotic. One manifestation of the chaos has been the loss of trust with the general public, particularly younger people. But now this other manifestation is they've lost all the political leaders. It seems on the face of it as though the different political leaders are taking different positions in the north, but I don't think that's the case. I think what they're really saying is that they need adequate financial support if we're going to have a lockdown. And I think in the same way that we didn't lock down soon enough earlier in the year, we should be locking down now. We should be locking down most of the country. Instead of it being 1, 2, 3, it should be 3, 2, 1. Most of the country needs to be locked down, but there are some parts that probably don't need to be, not much, Southwest and some other places. And if they're not locked down, then if the testing capacity is up to scratch, then they can deal with outbreaks in those places. But there's big differences emerging now between England and Wales because the Welsh are doing all the testing themselves. They're not giving large amounts of money to duff private companies that can't do the job. Well, these people are getting between £2,000 and £7,000 a day for failure. I would just quote John Lennon at them, you know, how do you sleep? How do you sleep? This is public money. We are in the worst public health emergency for 100 years, and you are ripping the country off. We're in a bad place. It's interesting, there's an editorial in the Times this morning, which is more or less calling for a coalition, which is something I've been raising from time to time. We've got a very poor administration, a very poor government, very poor ministers. And the Prime Minister needs to get the best people round him from whatever party, and he needs to have the best people in his cabinet, not just people who supported him over Brexit. There are good Conservative MPs, and they need to be brought in instead of the weak ones. I mean, where I am is to say, at this stage, I don't know why anyone's listening to the government, because most people aren't. What we need to do is we need to take charge of this ourselves. We don't want our relatives getting sick and dying. I think, unfortunately, when you treat people like children, you shouldn't be surprised if they behave like children. I said at the outset, the public needs to be treated as adults, because this requires all us grown-ups to work together. But we've infantilized the young people. So they're behaving like infants and delinquents because they've been infantilized. We've got to retrieve that situation. The government, instead of telling people what to do, should be asking people how best to support them. They should be asking the political leaders that question. They should be asking the universities that question. I mean, I've said on here before, I think that the universities shouldn't have everybody in on the campuses. I think the private schools, many of whom have invested heavily in online learning, should be required to share all that technology that they've got, all those curricula that they've got, software. They should be sharing that with the state schools. There's no reason why every school has to reinvent the wheel and write its own online curriculum materials. We could just have a national online curriculum in each subject for all the kids across the country to access. And then the classroom teachers can provide online learning support to their classes at home. If some of the classes are at home, some are at school, if they're rotating, if on average only a third of the children are in school, because that would reduce the density in the classrooms, on the playing fields, on the school premises. And the same with the universities. But for goodness sake, let's get some brain power around this instead of idiots who happen to be running the country. Well, the circuit that needs breaking is this clique who are running this disaster. That's the circuit that needs breaking. This country's got 60+ million imaginative people in it. There aren't only males who've been to a particular public school who've all followed each other into some kind of institution called Downing Street. I mean, we need to have the public engaged in social mobilization. We saw it in April when people formed thousands of community groups to help their neighbours and everybody. That's what we need. We need social mobilization for a lockdown, which we need to be as short as possible, as soft as possible, but we need to lock down imminently, and we need to bring forward the half-term school closure imminently, just to give us a chance to get on top of this before we start seeing the deaths mount into the thousands again. There's no such thing as the science, as we've said before, but they've used that slogan along with all the other slogans to hide behind and to stack up alibis to be able to blame everybody. Well, I'll tell you, I'll be straight with you. The government's running out of people to blame. You know, at the end of the day, governments are intended to govern. They're not intended to have rave parties across the country orchestrated from Downing Street, which is what they've been doing by default. We've got anarchy because we've let the libertarians take over the pandemic, and we've got to get it back. This isn't about being tough with young people. It's about setting an example, and it's about taking the right choice. It's about getting the testing and tracing sorted. It's about saying goodbye to magical thinking. I think it will all be over by Christmas, therefore it will. I wish it'll be all over by Christmas, therefore it will. I think I'll have 100,000 tests by the end of May, therefore I will. Magical thinking, child development, they tell you magical thinking ends at about the age of 7 or 8. We've got a government that's run by magical thinkers. The paradox of this is that this administration, so keen on Brexit, looks as though it's accelerated the separation off of Scotland from the United Kingdom. And before we know where we are, we're going to have a movement for separation of the north of England. I think the Welsh nationalist cause is geeing up as well. This is not a one nation government. This is an inside the M25 government that thinks the empire still exists and it's being run from Downing Street, and that people in the north are in the outer reaches of the empire. And the paradox is this is the government that claims to be the government for the United Kingdom. There's huge anger, and that the anger crosses party political lines, increasingly crosses party political lines once you get away from London. So, I don't know. This is fast moving stuff. And each day we wait for the numbers. I mean, we had that strange thing at the weekend because we long since realised that Public Health England doesn't work weekends, so you don't get a complete count on Saturday and Sunday. But it was sort of down to 58, I think it was, on Sunday, and then back up to, double what it had been on Thursday, Friday. But we'll see what the real numbers are. Well, real-ish, because we still don't know all the numbers of people who've died at home, either because they died from COVID or because they couldn't get treatment in hospital to be looked after there. It's fast-moving. I don't know. All I know is that all my instincts, all my experience tells me that we are in a bad place, and that we cannot manage this by messing about, vacillating, trying to transfer the blame onto other people. This requires grown-up government. Unfortunately, we've got an adolescent in charge of the government, and we need to move on. It's exasperating to see us just repeating all the mistakes again. I'm more or less lost for words. I worry that there's this total unwillingness to see how interconnected, public health and the economy are like that. If we don't get on top of this, the economy is screwed. We have to get on top of this for the sake of the economy. It's not about either or, it's both. What we're beginning to hear now is a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, and not just small and medium-sized, who struggled through that first 6 or 7 months, are now becoming demoralized. They're getting ready literally to shut up shop. There's going to be mass unemployment unless we do something about it. We need to have creative ways of keeping people productively engaged, helping to get this damn thing under control. But the next thing that will happen, if we're not careful, is there'll be public disorder, which is the last thing I want to see. But we've already heard that the Prime Minister's lining up the army to come into the cities if needed. And, then the only people who benefit from public disorder are the extremes of the right and of the left. And usually it's the extremes of the right who dominate because they're better organised. I think one thing that needs to happen is that those Conservative members of Parliament and in the Lords of good faith need to regain control of their own party. That's what needs to happen in the immediate term. Those good folk in the Conservative Party need to regain control of their party, and they need to reach out across the aisles to the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the Greens, the Scottish Nationals, the Welsh, everybody. We need a coalition approach. We need the best people. We need the best advisors. We've been let down by our scientific advisors and by many others. Some of them very late in the day seem to have had a glimmer of light, but we need to have proper advisors, and we need to decentralize the management of this situation to our elected representatives in the boroughs, in the cities, in the towns of this country, this great country, with all its expertise, all its experience, people who didn't go to the same small number of schools and hang out in the same chum networks. We need to open this up to the people of the country to take charge. What we have to recognise is that we've been let down by the government. They're not coming to our rescue anytime soon. There are no Mounties coming over the Rockies with vaccines before Christmas or Easter or next summer. That what we have to do is take charge of our own bit of the mess, which means that we individually, our families, our neighbours, our friends, have to do whatever it takes to squash this virus out. This virus likes crowds. This virus likes indoors spaces. This virus likes people hugging each other and being intimate with each other in groups and so on. We have to take those principles on board. We have to behave in a hygienic fashion, whether it's hand washing, mask wearing, facial coverings, wiping down the surfaces properly with antiseptic and all of that in the kitchen and the bathroom and the doorknobs. We've got to take charge of our bit of the mess. And then we've got to hold the government to account for taking charge of its bit of the mess and giving away the wherewithal to our local town halls. You know, one of the first things that we said in one of the very first of these broadcasts was wipe your keyboard down if anybody else is using it. We're now hearing that the virus can live for a long time on a mobile phone, so they need cleaning, particularly if someone else is going to use your phone. We need to keep our immediate environment clean, and we need to avoid unnecessary mixing with other people. You know, I've said this before. My parents' generation went through 5 years of war. I remember one of my cousins didn't see his dad for 6 years because he was in Burma. You know, that generation endured hardship. This generation is being accused of being snowflakes, but it's not just the young, it's older people as well. You know, people who are not prepared to realise we're in for the long haul. Unfortunately, the government's lost its moral authority by its own behaviour, but we do need local leaders to stand up and set the example and get everybody back on track. We can still sort this out if we all come together. We all look at what we have to do for ourselves and our families and our neighbourhoods and our workplaces. We can do this. Don't expect anything from the government. They've demonstrated they're not up to it. But let's do it together. Let's be positive, be kind to each other. Let's work together. Let's put this virus behind us, and let's rebuild this country to be one that we can be proud of again. This book tells the story of what happened, what didn't happen, what went wrong, what needs to happen, and I hope that this is what will be the starting point for the inquiry into this dreadful disaster when we finally get an inquiry. But in the meantime, we need to be learning the lessons now.